Hey guys, tonight we sail into the frozen hell of medieval piracy, where survival meant more than just dodging the hangman's noose. Picture this: you're huddled below deck on a ship that creaks like breaking bones, the North Sea gnawing at the hull with teeth of ice. Your stomach claws at your ribs, and the only thing standing between you and starvation is whatever rotting scraps you managed to steal from the last raid. This isn't the romanticized world of treasure maps and parrot companions. This is the brutal reality of what medieval pirates actually ate to survive winters that could kill faster than any sword. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the sound of ice scraping against wood like fingernails on a coffin lid. The ship lurches, and your empty belly reminds you that yesterday's meal was nothing more than a handful of weevil-infested hardtack and a swig of water that tasted like rust. Welcome to winter aboard a medieval pirate vessel, where food wasn't just sustenance. It was the difference between seeing another sunrise or becoming fish bait in the North Atlantic. Medieval pirates weren't the swashbuckling heroes of Hollywood tales. They were desperate men, clinging to life on ships barely seaworthy, raiding merchant vessels not for gold doubloons, but for the most precious cargo of all: food. When winter storms raged and trade routes froze solid, these maritime outlaws faced a choice that would make modern survivalists weep. Eat whatever you could find, or die slowly in the belly of a ship that had become your tomb. The irony cuts deep. Pirates who terrorized coastal towns during summer months often found themselves begging the sea for mercy come winter. Their fearsome reputation meant nothing to an empty stomach, and their skill with cutlass and cannon couldn't conjure bread from thin air. The very men who struck fear into merchant hearts became victims themselves, not of rival crews or naval forces, but of the most ancient enemy known to mankind: hunger. Archaeological evidence paints a grim picture of medieval pirate sustenance. Shipwrecks from the 14th and 15th centuries reveal storage areas filled not with treasure chests, but with barrels designed to hold preserved foods. These weren't luxury accommodations. They were survival caches, desperately maintained stores that meant the difference between a crew that lived to raid another day and a crew that simply vanished into the winter mists. The foundation of any pirate's winter diet was hardtack, though calling it food stretches the definition beyond recognition. This concrete hard biscuit was baked from flour, water, and salt, then dried until it could survive longer than most of the men who ate it. Imagine gnawing on something with the texture of tree bark and all the flavor of regret. Pirates would soak hardtack in whatever liquid they could find: ale, wine, or even seawater, anything to make it soft enough to swallow without breaking teeth. But hardtack came with companions that no sailor invited to board. Weevils, those tiny black beetles, burrowed into the biscuits like miners seeking gold. Pirates learned to tap their hardtack against the table before eating, listening for the telltale sound of insects scurrying inside. Some men claimed the weevils added protein. Others insisted they added nothing but disgust. Either way, when winter hunger gnawed at your belly, you ate the weevils and thanked whatever god still listened that you had anything to chew at all. Salt pork was the next pillar of pirate survival, though the term pork was often generous. These were chunks of pig fat and gristle, packed in so much salt that they resembled white rocks more than meat. The salt served its purpose, preserving the pork for months or even years, but it also sucked every drop of moisture from the meat, leaving behind something that required soaking for hours before it became remotely edible. Pirates would hang strips of salt pork in whatever fresh water they could spare, watching it slowly return to something resembling food. The preparation ritual became almost sacred. Men would gather around barrels of soaking pork, sharing stories while they waited for the salt to leach out enough to make the meat chewable. They knew that rushing the process meant a meal that could crack teeth and burn throats raw with sodium. Patience, that rarest of pirate virtues, became essential when dealing with preserved meat that had the consistency of leather and twice the stubbornness. But salt pork, like hardtack, came with its own unwelcome guests. Maggots thrived in the fat, white, writhing reminders that even preserved food eventually surrendered to decay. Pirates developed a peculiar skill, the ability to pick maggots from their meat without losing appetite. They told themselves the squirming protein was just another gift from the sea, though their stomachs often disagreed violently. When the preserved foods ran low, pirates turned to the sea itself, though winter fishing from a storm-tossed ship was more prayer than skill. They would lower hooks and nets into water so cold that touching the line could freeze fingers solid in minutes. The catch, when it came, was often disappointing. Winter fish were scarce, and those that bit were frequently too small to feed a starving crew. Yet pirates became masters of making something from nothing. They learned to eat parts of fish that land dwellers would discard without a second thought. Fish heads were boiled into soup, the eyes and brains providing fats that kept men alive when everything else failed. Fish bones were ground into powder and mixed with whatever grain remained, creating a gritty paste that filled stomachs even if it satisfied no other hunger. The more desperate crews turned to jellyfish, those translucent drifters that appeared even in winter waters. Pirates would haul them aboard with nets, trying to avoid the stinging tentacles while harvesting what little nutrition the creatures offered. Jellyfish soup became a last resort meal, a watery broth that tasted of salt and disappointment, but provided just enough sustenance to stave off death for another day. Seaweed, too, found its way into pirate diets when desperation struck. Crews would drag nets through kelp forests, hauling up slimy green masses that could be dried and chewed like the world's most unappetizing jerky. The taste was indescribable, somewhere between ocean water and rotting vegetables. But seaweed contained nutrients that prevented scurvy, that dreaded disease that turned pirates into walking corpses with bleeding gums and loose teeth. But perhaps the most crucial element of pirate winter survival wasn't any particular food, but the liquid that washed it all down. Fresh water was more precious than gold when storms prevented regular stops at friendly ports. Pirates learned to collect rainwater in every available container, from cooking pots to spare boots. They would spread sailcloth to catch precipitation, then funnel the precious liquid into barrels that were guarded more carefully than any treasure chest. When fresh water ran out, pirates faced a choice that separated the living from the dead. Some crews attempted to distill seawater, heating it over small fires and collecting the steam on cold metal surfaces. The process was dangerous, time-consuming, and often produced water that still tasted of salt. But it was better than dying of thirst while surrounded by an ocean they couldn't drink. Others turned to their stores of alcohol, not for celebration, but for hydration. Ale and wine, when properly stored, could last longer than fresh water without spoiling. Pirates would water down their alcohol, stretch in precious supplies while still getting the fluids their bodies craved. The weak beer that resulted was hardly intoxicating, but it kept men alive when clean water was nothing more than a memory. The social dynamics of eating aboard a pirate ship during winter months revealed the true nature of these maritime outlaws. Contrary to popular myths about democratic pirate crews sharing everything equally, food distribution often followed the harsh hierarchy of survival. The captain and his favored officers ate first and best, claiming the choicest portions of any catch or preserved stores. The common crew received whatever remained, and the newest or least popular members might go days with nothing but scraps. Yet even in this brutal system, strange moments of generosity emerged. Veterans would sometimes share their meager rations with sick shipmates, understanding that a crew member who died of starvation was one less hand to work the ship or fight off attackers. These acts weren't driven by kindness so much as cold calculation, but they revealed that even among thieves and murderers, the bonds forged by shared hardship could overcome individual selfishness. The psychological toll of winter eating wore on crews as heavily as the physical deprivation. Men who had once terrorized merchant ships found themselves reduced to creatures driven by base hunger, counting weevils and arguing over fish bones. The swagger and bravado that defined pirate culture melted away when faced with empty bellies and the gnawing certainty that the next meal might not come at all. Some crews developed elaborate rituals around food preparation, not from any sense of culinary pride, but as a way to maintain sanity when facing the same revolting meals day after day. They would tell stories while soaking hardtack, sing songs while picking maggots from salt pork, and create elaborate ceremonies around the distribution of whatever fresh catch they managed to secure. The winter diet of medieval pirates was a testament to human endurance and the lengths to which desperate men would go to cling to life. It was a world where weevil-infested biscuits were treasured, where maggoty meat was salvation, and where drinking your own urine might be the difference between seeing another dawn or joining the countless souls claimed by the merciless sea. Tonight, as we delve deeper into this frozen hell of survival, we'll discover the true ingenuity of men who refused to surrender to winter's cruel embrace, even when it meant eating things that would make modern stomachs revolt in horror. The morning brings no relief from the gnawing emptiness that has become your constant companion. You stumble across the ice-slick deck, your boots finding purchase on planks coated with frost thick as armor plating. Below deck, the cook, if you can call him that, tends to a cauldron that bubbles with something resembling soup, but smelling like the devil's own bathwater. This is your breakfast, your sustenance, your lifeline in a world where every calorie consumed is a victory against the grave. Medieval pirate cooks were less culinary artists and more alchemists of survival, transforming inedible scraps into something the human body could process without immediate revolt. These men, often former prisoners or the most desperate volunteers, wielded ladles like weapons against starvation itself. They understood that their skills meant the difference between a crew that could still swing cutlasses and a crew that had withered into walking skeletons. The galley, that cramped corner of hell below deck, was equipped with nothing more than a brick firebox and whatever pots the crew had managed to steal or salvage. Cooking fires were permitted only during the calmest weather, when the risk of setting the entire ship ablaze was merely catastrophic rather than certain. During storms or heavy seas, pirates ate their meals cold, if they ate at all, choking down frozen chunks of whatever the cook had prepared during the last calm spell. But winter brought challenges that no amount of culinary creativity could fully overcome. When the last of the preserved meat had been consumed, bones and all, pirates turned to sources of protein that would make modern diners flee in terror. Rats, those ubiquitous ship companions, became delicacies when properly prepared. The cook would trap them using scraps of spoiled food as bait, then skin and roast them over the galley fire until their meat resembled tiny, stringy chickens. Rat meat, surprisingly, was considered superior to many of the other protein sources available to winter pirates. Unlike the maggot-infested salt pork or the weevil-riddled hardtack, fresh rat was exactly that, fresh. The animals fed on whatever they could find aboard ship, which often meant they were better nourished than the crew members who eventually ate them. Pirates developed a peculiar appreciation for plump rats, the kind that had grown fat on stolen grain or cheese, considering them a sign of good fortune rather than infestation. The preparation of rat required skills that few landsmen possessed. The cook would first check each carcass for signs of disease, understanding that sick rats could poison an entire crew. Healthy specimens were skinned with the same care a butcher might show a prize pig, every scrap of meat carefully preserved. The organs were never discarded. The liver and heart provided concentrated nutrition that could mean the difference between life and death for a malnourished pirate. When rats became scarce, either through overhunting or simple bad luck, pirates turned their attention to the ship itself as a source of sustenance. Leather, that versatile material used for everything from boots to rigging, could be boiled into a gelatinous soup that provided some nutrition, even if it offered no pleasure. Old boots, belt straps, and even pieces of sail canvas found their way into the cooking pot when desperation reached its peak. The process of rendering leather edible required patience and skill that tested even experienced cooks. The leather had to be scraped clean of any dyes or treatments, then soaked in whatever fresh water could be spared. After hours of soaking, it was cut into small pieces and boiled until it began to break down into something approaching food. The resulting broth was thick, greasy, and tasted like liquid chew, but it contained proteins and fats that kept starving men alive for another day. Ship's rope, particularly the older hemp varieties, could also serve as emergency nutrition when properly prepared. Pirates would unravel lengths of rope, separating the individual fibers and boiling them into a stringy mush that could be swallowed, if not enjoyed. The hemp provided fiber that helped with digestion, though it also caused stomach cramps that left men doubled over in agony for hours after eating. But perhaps the most desperate measure taken by winter pirates was the consumption of sawdust and wood shavings, mixed with whatever fats could be scraped from previous meals. This mixture, euphemistically called carpenter's porridge by crews with dark humor, provided bulk that filled empty stomachs, even if it offered little actual nutrition. Men would chew the woody paste for hours, their jaws working mechanically as they tried to extract whatever sustenance they could from what was essentially processed timber. The social rituals surrounding these desperate meals became elaborate performances designed to maintain some semblance of civilization in the face of barbarism. Pirates would gather in the cramped space below deck, sharing stories and jokes, while they consumed rat stew or leather soup. They created elaborate tales about the quality of their meal, praising the cook for his skill in preparing such fine rat, or complimenting the tenderness of a particularly well-boiled boot. These communal meals served purposes beyond mere nutrition. They maintained the bonds that held the crew together when individual survival instincts threatened to tear the ship apart. Men who shared rat bones were less likely to murder each other over the last scrap of hardtack, though such restraint was never guaranteed when starvation reached its worst stages. The hierarchy of hunger aboard pirate ships revealed itself most clearly during the distribution of these emergency foods. Captain and officers claimed the choicest rats, the plumpest specimens that promised the most meat. Common crew members received smaller, scrawnier rodents, while the ship's boys and least valuable hands might find themselves gnawing on rat bones that had already been picked clean by their superiors. Yet, even this brutal system had its exceptions. Skilled navigators, essential gunners, and experienced sailors often received better rations regardless of their official rank, understanding that certain crew members were too valuable to lose to starvation. A dead navigator was useless, even if he had been fed like a king, and a starved gunner couldn't aim a cannon to save his life or anyone else's. The psychological impact of eating rats, leather, and sawdust wore on even the hardest pirates in ways that combat never could. Men who had faced death in battle without flinching found themselves weeping as they chewed on boiled boot leather, their minds struggling to accept what their bodies demanded for survival. The proud outlaws who had terrorized merchant vessels were reduced to scavenging creatures, fighting over scraps like the rats they consumed. Some crews developed elaborate justifications for their desperate diet, creating myths and stories that transformed their degradation into something approaching nobility. They claimed that eating rats gave them the cunning of those creatures, that consuming leather granted them the toughness of the animals it came from. These tales were obviously false, but they provided psychological comfort to men whose reality had become too horrible to face without some form of mental protection. The cook's role during these dark periods elevated him from mere food preparer to something approaching a shaman or priest. His ability to transform inedible materials into something that could sustain life made him nearly as valuable as the captain himself. Crews understood that a skilled cook could keep them alive when a poor one would see them all dead within weeks, and they treated him accordingly. Winter storms added another layer of complexity to the already desperate situation. When seas became too rough for cooking fires, pirates were forced to consume their emergency rations raw, gnawing on frozen rat meat or chewing leather that had the consistency of tree bark. These meals provided little warmth to bodies already chilled to the bone, creating a vicious cycle where men needed more calories to stay warm, but had access to fewer sources of heat to make their food palatable. The storage and preservation of emergency food supplies required constant vigilance and creativity. Rats had to be processed immediately after capture to prevent spoilage, their meat dried or smoked when weather permitted. Leather was carefully rationed, with pieces cut to specific sizes to ensure fair distribution among crew members. Even sawdust was precious, stored in waterproof containers to prevent it from becoming soggy and inedible. As winter deepened and supplies dwindled further, pirates faced choices that would haunt them for the rest of their lives, however long those lives might be. The line between survival and madness grew thinner with each passing day, and the men who had once struck fear into the hearts of honest sailors found themselves confronting fears far more terrible than any they had ever inspired. The worst days came when even the rats grew scarce, their tiny corpses becoming memories as precious as gold coins. You press your face against the porthole, watching ice crystals form on the glass while your stomach consumes itself from within. The cook has taken to eyeing the ship's cat with a hunger that goes beyond desperation into something approaching madness. This is when medieval pirates discovered that the ocean itself could provide sustenance, though it demanded a price that few were willing to pay. Seabirds became the next target for crews skilled enough to catch them. Gulls, cormorants, and the occasional albatross would follow ships hoping for scraps, unaware they were being hunted by men who viewed them not as omens, but as flying meals. Pirates fashioned crude nets from rope and sailcloth, learning to time their throws with the rhythm of the waves and the flight patterns of hungry birds. The preparation of seabirds required techniques passed down through whispered conversations between veteran sailors. The feathers had to be plucked while the bird was still warm, the skin preserved for later use as waterproofing or emergency bandages. Every part of the bird was consumed, from the stringy breast meat to the bitter organs that provided essential vitamins. Even the bones were cracked open and their marrow sucked clean, providing fats that helped combat the bone-deep cold that threatened to freeze pirates solid. Gull eggs when they could be found during raids on coastal nesting sites, were treasured beyond measure. Pirates would risk life and limb-scaling treacherous cliffs to reach nests perched on impossible ledges, knowing that a single egg contained more nutrition than a week's worth of hardtack and weevils. The eggs were eaten raw when discovery was imminent, or carefully rationed and added to whatever soup the cook could conjure from the day's meager ingredients. But winter brought its own unique challenges to bird hunting. Seabirds became scarcer as storms drove them to seek shelter far from the shipping lanes where pirates prowled. The few that remained were often too weak from their own struggles against the elements to provide much meat, their bodies reduced to feather and bone with little flesh to offer starving men. When birds failed them, pirates turned their attention to the strange creatures that could be hauled from winter seas with improvised fishing gear. Squid and octopus, those alien denizens of the deep, became prized catches despite their intimidating appearance and rubber-like texture. The tentacles provided protein, while the heads contained organs that could be ground into paste and mixed with whatever grain remained in the ship's stores. The preparation of cephalopods required knowledge that few pirates possessed when they first encountered these creatures. The ink sacs had to be carefully removed to prevent the meat from becoming bitter and inedible. The beaks were dangerous, capable of slicing fingers to the bone if handled carelessly. Yet experienced cooks learned to transform these bizarre sea monsters into meals that could sustain a crew for days. Their meat tough but nutritious when properly prepared. Barnacles, scraped from the ship's hull, became another source of emergency nutrition, though harvesting them required pirates to brave the icy waters that surrounded their vessel. Men would lower themselves on ropes using knives and hammers to pry the stubborn mollusks from the wooden planks, while waves threatened to dash them against the hull or drag them down into the depths. The work was dangerous, exhausting, and often yielded barely enough meat to justify the risk. The tiny morsels of flesh hidden within barnacle shells were barely worth the effort required to extract them, but starvation made even the most meager rewards precious beyond measure. Pirates developed techniques for cracking the shells efficiently, using the flat sides of their cutlasses as improvised hammers while holding the barnacles steady with whatever tools they could improvise. Kelp and other seaweeds that drifted past the ship were hauled aboard with nets and hooks, their slimy fronds providing vitamins that helped prevent the scurvy that turned strong pirates into bleeding, toothless invalids. The taste was indescribable, somewhere between rotting fish and bitter medicine. But crews learned to choke down the stringy vegetation while holding their noses and thinking of better times. Some varieties of seaweed could be dried and ground into powder, then mixed with whatever fats were available to create a paste that could be spread on hardtack or eaten by the handful when desperation struck. This green slime provided nutrients that kept men alive, though it also caused digestive problems that left crews groaning and doubled over with stomach cramps for hours after consumption. The social dynamics aboard ship shifted dramatically as food became scarcer and the sources more revolting. Men who had once shared meals without thought began hoarding scraps with the jealousy of dragons guarding treasure. Trust eroded as quickly as the ship's supplies, with crew members watching each other for signs of hidden food or secret caches that might have been overlooked during previous searches. Violence over food became commonplace, though it was usually brief and brutal rather than the elaborate duels of honor depicted in romantic tales. A man caught stealing another's ration of rat meat might find himself with a knife between his ribs before he could swallow his ill-gotten meal. These killings were rarely punished, understanding that a thief who stole food was stealing life itself from his shipmates. The cook's position became increasingly precarious as supplies dwindled and crew members grew more desperate. Men who had once praised his skill in preparing rat stew now blamed him for their empty bellies, as if his culinary abilities could conjure food from empty air. Some cooks were murdered by their own crews, desperate pirates convinced that killing the cook would somehow reveal hidden stores of food that had been kept from them. Yet skilled cooks who managed to keep their crews alive through the worst periods of starvation became legends in their own right, their names whispered with reverence in taverns and brothels where pirates gathered to share tales of survival. These men possessed knowledge that went beyond mere cooking, understanding which parts of the ship could be consumed, which sea creatures were safe to eat, and how to stretch meager supplies to last just one more day. The preparation of increasingly desperate meals required tools and techniques that would have horrified civilized diners, but were essential for survival in the frozen hell of winter piracy. Knives became multi-purpose instruments used for skinning rats, scraping barnacles, cutting leather into edible strips, and defending the cook from crew members driven mad by hunger. Cauldrons that had once held stews made from stolen provisions now bubbled with mixtures that defied description. Seaweed broth mixed with ground barnacles and seasoned with bird droppings when salt ran out. Leather soup thickened with sawdust, and whatever bone meal could be scraped from previous meals. These concoctions sustained life, even if they offered no pleasure, keeping hearts beating and lungs breathing when death seemed preferable to another spoonful. The ritual of mealtime became increasingly important as the food itself became more revolting. Pirates would gather in circles, sharing stories and songs while they consumed their desperate rations, trying to distract themselves from the reality of what they were eating. These moments of forced camaraderie helped maintain the bonds that held crews together when individual survival instincts threatened to tear them apart. Some crews developed elaborate games and competitions around their meals, challenging each other to consume the most revolting portions or to identify the ingredients in the cook's latest creation. These contests served multiple purposes, providing entertainment in a world devoid of pleasure while also ensuring that even the most disgusting food was consumed rather than wasted. The psychological toll of eating increasingly desperate fare wore on crews in ways that combat never could. Men who had faced death in battle without flinching found themselves retching uncontrollably at the thought of another meal of seaweed and barnacles. The proud outlaws who had terrorized merchant vessels were reduced to creatures driven by pure survival instinct. Their humanity eroded by the endless hunger that gnawed at their souls. Yet, even as their bodies consumed whatever foulness could be scraped from the depths, some pirates discovered that the sea held one final source of sustenance that tested the very limits of human endurance. When all else failed, when the rats were gone and the seabirds had fled to warmer waters, desperate crews turned to a practice so grim that even hardened murderers whispered about it in hushed tones. Cannibalism, the consumption of their own dead. The first death from starvation was always the hardest. You watch as a shipmate, weakened beyond recovery, finally succumbs to the cold and hunger that have been eating him alive for weeks. His body lies on the frozen deck, and the remaining crew faces a choice that will haunt them until their dying day. Do they consign precious protein to the depths, or do they cross a line that separates them from the beasts they hunt? Medieval pirate crews developed their own twisted codes around this ultimate taboo. The newly dead were never consumed immediately, partly from respect, but mostly from practical consideration that fresh human meat needed time to be properly prepared. The cook would perform rituals that bore disturbing resemblance to butchering livestock, his knife work practiced and efficient as he separated useful portions from those too gruesome to contemplate. The preparation required techniques that no man should ever master. Certain cuts provided better nutrition, while others were avoided not from squeamishness, but from practical knowledge that some parts of the human body carried diseases that could kill the living faster than starvation. The heart and liver were prized for their concentrated nutrients, while the brain was often avoided due to superstitions that consuming it would drive men mad. These meals were never eaten in celebration or fellowship. They were consumed in silence, each man forcing down meat that tasted of desperation and defeat. The crew would gather in the darkest corners of the ship, away from any light that might illuminate what they were doing to themselves and their memories. Some men wept as they ate, understanding that they were crossing boundaries that could never be uncrossed. The social hierarchy that governed food distribution broke down entirely when cannibalism entered the picture. Captains and common crew alike received equal portions, understanding that in this ultimate extremity, rank meant nothing compared to the simple need to survive another day. The usual fights over food ceased, replaced by grim cooperation born of shared horror at what they had become. Yet even cannibalism had its limitations. Winter cold preserved bodies longer than summer heat, but decay was inevitable, and spoiled human flesh was as dangerous as any other rotten meat. Crews had to judge carefully when a corpse had passed beyond safe consumption, knowing that eating diseased meat could kill them faster than continued starvation. Some pirates developed elaborate justifications for their actions, creating ceremonies and rituals that transformed cannibalism into something approaching religious observance. They claimed they were honoring the dead by allowing their bodies to sustain the living, or that consuming a brave shipmate would grant them his courage. These rationalizations were obviously desperate attempts to maintain sanity, but they provided psychological comfort to men whose reality had become too horrible to face without protection. The long-term effects of extreme malnutrition, combined with the psychological trauma of cannibalism, created crews that barely resembled human beings. Men who had once been feared raiders became walking skeletons, their eyes hollow and their movements mechanical. They spoke little, ate less, and existed in a state somewhere between life and death, sustained only by the animal instinct to continue breathing. When spring finally arrived and trade routes reopened, these surviving crews often found themselves unemployable, even by pirate standards. Their gaunt appearance and haunted expressions marked them as men who had crossed lines that other outlaws wouldn't dare approach. They drifted from port to port, carrying secrets that isolated them from both criminal and lawful society. The few who managed to return to normal piracy after surviving such winters were forever changed by their experiences. They hoarded food obsessively, even when supplies were plentiful, and could never again take a meal for granted. The taste of bread and fresh meat was revelation to palates that had grown accustomed to leather and human flesh. Some crews that survived these ultimate tests of endurance became legendary, not for their treasure or their battles, but for their sheer stubborn refusal to die when death seemed preferable to continued existence. Their stories spread through pirate communities like warnings, cautionary tales about the true cost of choosing life at sea over life on land. The ships themselves bore scars from these desperate winters. Hulls showed damage where pirates had scraped away barnacles. Masts were weakened from having rope cut away for consumption, and storage areas were stripped bare of anything remotely edible. These vessels became floating monuments to human desperation, their very structure telling stories of survival that their crews could never speak aloud. Recovery from such winters took months or even years. Bodies that had consumed themselves to stay alive needed time to rebuild muscle and fat, while minds that had witnessed unspeakable acts required different healing entirely. Many pirates who survived the worst starvation never fully recovered, their health permanently damaged by malnutrition and their sanity fractured by memories they could never escape. The knowledge gained from these experiences was passed down through pirate communities in whispered conversations and coded warnings. Veteran crews shared techniques for preserving emergency food supplies, identifying safe sources of protein in desperate situations, and recognizing the signs that a man had reached his breaking point. This dark wisdom became part of pirate culture, survival knowledge that was more valuable than any treasure map. Yet for all the horror and degradation, these stories also revealed something extraordinary about human endurance. Men who should have died from cold, hunger, and despair somehow found the strength to continue existing when existence itself became torture. They proved that survival was possible even in the most impossible circumstances, though the cost of that survival might be everything that made life worth living. The final irony of medieval pirate winter survival was that success often proved more damaging than failure. Pirates who died quickly from starvation or cold were spared the psychological trauma of eating their shipmates or consuming their own ship piece by piece. Those who lived long enough to see spring, carried scars that never healed, memories that poisoned every future meal, and shadows that followed them until their dying day. As dawn breaks over waters that have claimed countless souls, you understand that medieval pirate winter survival was never about heroism or adventure. It was about the terrible mathematics of desperation, where every calorie consumed was stolen from death itself, and every day survived was purchased with pieces of humanity that could never be recovered. The men who endured these frozen hells weren't heroes of romantic tales, but broken survivors of an ordeal that tested the very limits of what it meant to be human. The ship rocks one final time as our journey through this frozen hell draws to a close. You've walked the blood-slicked decks with men who transformed from feared raiders into hollow-eyed survivors, their humanity stripped away piece by piece with every desperate meal. You've tasted the bitter reality of weevil-infested hardtack, felt the greasy weight of maggot-riddled salt pork on your tongue, and witnessed the ultimate degradation of crews reduced to consuming their own dead to see another dawn. This wasn't the glorious piracy of legend and song. This was survival at its most brutal and unforgiving, where the difference between life and death came down to your willingness to gnaw rat bones, chew boiled leather, and swallow your own revulsion along with whatever scraps the merciless sea provided. Medieval pirates didn't die with cutlasses in hand and treasure at their feet. They died slowly, their bodies consuming themselves while their minds fractured under the weight of choices no human should ever face. The men who survived these winter ordeals carried more than physical scars. They bore the invisible wounds of having crossed lines that separated civilization from barbarism, of having tasted desperation so complete that cannibalism seemed reasonable and leather soup felt like salvation. Their hollow eyes had seen humanity reduced to its most basic components, calories and protein, and the animal will to continue breathing when breathing itself became agony. Yet, in this darkness, we glimpse something profound about the human spirit. Even when reduced to creatures barely recognizable as men, these pirates found ways to endure. They shared their misery, created rituals around revolting meals, and maintained the bonds that held their crews together when individual survival should have torn them apart. They proved that life, however degraded, however painful, was still worth clinging to when death offered the only alternative. Tonight, as you return to your warm bed and well-stocked kitchen, remember the men who ate sawdust and called it porridge, who fought over rat bones like they were crown jewels, who transformed the act of survival into an art form painted in shades of desperation and hunger. Their story reminds us that the line between civilization and savagery is thinner than we dare imagine, and that sometimes the greatest courage isn't found in battle, but in the simple act of taking another breath when everything inside you screams to surrender. The medieval pirates who survived brutal winters didn't conquer the sea. They merely refused to let it conquer them, one revolting meal at a time.